What's up guys, my name is Ace, and lately in the community I've seen a few rumblings about COD 2024. It is that time of the year where people start looking forward to the next Call of Duty game, and also there have been a few leaks at this stage. So I just wanted to have more of like a high-level discussion about some of my thoughts and the top 10 questions that I currently have surrounding COD 2024, the things that I'm most interested in hearing about and finding out about. Now, of course, this isn't meant to be a super informational video. This is more so just a laid-back conversation talking about some of the things that are on my mind with this upcoming Call of Duty game. And first, let's just talk about what we kind of know about this year's Call of Duty, although at this point, nothing's been really officially confirmed, but it does look like it's going to be a Treyarch Call of Duty game, and they've actually had a 4-year gap since the last game that they've led, which is the biggest gap we've seen for a single studio in developing a Call of Duty game. And therefore, that combination of Treyarch and a 4-year gap means my expectations are actually quite high coming into this year's Call of Duty game. Much higher than going from Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, for instance. Additionally, based on leaks from like over a year ago, we got some really early leaks for this year's Call of Duty game. It does appear this one's going to be set in the Gulf War, and it's very possible it will end up being called Call of Duty Black Ops Gulf War. Now, on top of just the general setting, we have seen some very specific leaks with like perk lists and map name lists and stuff. At this stage of the game, I feel it's not even really worth talking about these too much, simply because it's so early on that even if those leaks were accurate at the time of them coming out, so much is likely to change between when those leaks came out and when we actually see the game. So we're not going to get into too many details when it comes to that stuff, although I may mention it in passing. And so with that groundwork laid out, let's get into the biggest questions, the biggest things that I'm curious about when it comes to COD 2024. And one of the big general things is Game Pass. Now that Microsoft owns Call of Duty and we know that PlayStation deal was ending at the end of Modern Warfare 3, that definitely opens up the potential for this year's Call of Duty game to be launching on Game Pass, meaning if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you don't need to buy the game. You just need to be a subscriber and you'll be able to get access to the game from there. And on top of this, a couple weeks ago, there was an Xbox podcast where they actually mentioned that all first-party games will be playable on day one. And since Microsoft now owns Call of Duty, that would mean Call of Duty is a first-party game. And therefore, this seems to effectively confirm that this year's Call of Duty game will be available day one on Game Pass. And assuming that's the case, I'm very interested in seeing how this plays out. I think that could have a very positive impact on the player base, since the barrier to entry now is going to be super low for anybody that's already a Game Pass subscriber. There's no more $70 upfront cost to that. However, then there is also the question of the cheating situation. Is that going to make it much worse for the paid version of the game if all you need to do is have a Game Pass subscription in order to get in, rather than that $70 up front? If you get banned for that, then it's not that big of a deal. You just buy another Game Pass subscription and you're back into the game cheating. So lots of questions raised there, and I'm very curious to see how this ends up playing out, since this is unprecedented for Call of Duty. Next up, another big general question I have with this upcoming game is, will it be releasing on the older generation consoles? So PS4 and Xbox One? Is this the year where they cut those off and they just move forward to the current gen consoles? Because if we look at the past, when we went from the previous generation consoles, from PS3 to PS4, or Xbox 360 to Xbox One, with that generation, they launched alongside Call of Duty Ghosts. Then the previous gen consoles were still supported for the next Call of Duty game, which was Advanced Warfare, and the Call of Duty game after that, which was Black Ops 3. However, with the launch of Infinite Warfare, that's when they cut those off. So we had effectively 3 full games that were cross-generation, whereas this time around, with the newer generation of consoles, we've already had 4 games that are supported cross-generation. So we've already gone past that mark, and therefore I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is the year where the older generation consoles are cut out, and perhaps COD 2024 will only be launching on the newer gen. Now, in saying that, the business model may also be entirely different now. Microsoft really wants to push Game Pass heavily, and it seems they care a lot less about selling new consoles and a lot more about just getting as many Game Pass subscriptions as possible. So they may want to ensure that as many console generations as possible have access to playing it so that they can maximize those Game Pass purchases. So I might be wrong on this, but this may be the year that we end up with no cross-gen support. After that, let's get a bit more specific to the game. Carry forward. This is something that we saw for the first time going from Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, and I've actually had a lot of people bring this up on stream or in my comment section. Do I think they're going to continue that carry forward into Black Ops Gulf War, at least for multiplayer? And while I think it's technically still possible, it seems unlikely that they would be doing another year of carry forward, and personally I hope they don't carry forward another year. I think it was really neat that they tried that this year, going from Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, and it made a lot of sense because it's within the same sub-franchise and the timelines and everything work out just fine. Whereas if we are going back to the Gulf War, it would be very strange to have all of the content that we currently have in Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 in a Gulf War setting. On top of this, many of us have noticed that things are getting very bloated in Modern Warfare 3. I find the attachment selection is just insane. Even the weapon selection, it can be very overwhelming. And personally, I would love to see them start from scratch again with a clean slate for content, and we build up from there. And then I wouldn't mind seeing maybe carry over to the next Call of Duty game, depending on how that works out. Now, obviously, Warzone may be a totally different story. Maybe they will do carry forward with Warzone, but not for multiplayer. Only time will tell on that, but this is one of the big questions that I am thinking about at the moment. After that, the next big question I have here is progression. Are they going to finally make some significant adjustments to how they handle progression? Because I do remember Sledgehammer talking about this with Modern Warfare 3, how they wanted to do a different progression system, but they simply just didn't have enough time or resources to make that happen. I wonder if that means that the other studios are thinking the same thing. Are they wanting to try a different style of a progression system? Or are they just going to stick to the same old progression system that we've had since Modern Warfare 2019 with just minor tweaks to it, like a prestige shop, for instance? Personally, I really hope to see some changes here when it comes to progression. The system we've had in recent years with the seasonal level caps, where you just can only get to a certain point and then player XP is literally meaningless until the next season launches, I really don't like that style of a system. It seems artificially limiting and also redundant, since we also have a battle pass to grind for every season. Why do both of those have to be seasonally capped when I feel we should have something that's a lot more career-based when it comes to our player level, so player XP always means something, and then have the battle pass as your seasonal grind? These are just my thoughts on it. I'm not necessarily expecting any major changes here, but I think if there was a year to have an overhaul to progression, this could be it with that longer development cycle. Next, let's get more specifically into multiplayer things, like the Create a Class system. I'm very curious to see the direction they end up going here. I really wonder if they're going to try something totally new and experimental when it comes to Create a Class, or are they going to stick to the more tried and true thing like Pick 10? Maybe a Pick 10 combined with Gunsmith. I know I've been saying this for years now. I'd still love to see a system like that, where it's essentially Pick 10, but you also have the Gunsmith for your gun still, and maybe give several free attachments, and then any additional attachments after that will cost you your Pick 10 points. So you could sacrifice perks in order to get more attachments, or you could sacrifice attachments in order to get more perks, or equipment you could sacrifice as well. In general, I'm just really curious to see which direction they end up going with here, because I feel like this is an area that has been lacking in recent years. Modern Warfare 2 was horrible when it comes to this. With the charged perks and everything, I hated that system so much. Then with Modern Warfare 3, I don't necessarily hate the vests and gear system that they've got, and I don't think it was necessarily a terrible idea. However, the execution, I think, has been not great. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement, I feel, with how they balance the various vests and perks. So this is just another big area where I'm very curious to see the route they end up taking with COD 2024. And on a somewhat similar note to that, the streak system. This is something I'm really wondering about, because Cold War tried something totally different when it came to their score streak system, where it was based on your total score earned throughout a match and not the amount of score or kills in a single life. And while I do know that some people were really into that and they liked that idea, in general, it didn't seem to be all that successful. I remember the devs mentioning this on Twitter, like years after Cold War. They had mentioned that there were some clear flaws with the system, so I'm curious to see which route they end up going with here. Are they just going to play it safe and go with the same sort of system we've seen in the past couple years, where you have a kill streak, score streak toggle? Personally, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. I really like this style of a system that we've been seeing in the past couple years. But who knows, maybe they're going to try something that's experimental, but just different from what we saw in Cold War. Next, when it comes to specific gameplay related things, I'm curious to see what this game is just going to feel like in general, because I believe they actually confirmed this officially, that all Call of Duty games going forward, including this year's, will be on the newer branch of the engine, whereas Cold War was still on an older branch of the engine. So this is the first time we're seeing a Treyarch game with a post-Modern Warfare 2019 version of the Call of Duty engine. And that just raises a bunch of questions on its own, like, will there be tactical sprint? There was a leak for a perk in COD 2024 that mentions tactical sprint, so it appears we are going to be seeing that for the first time in a Treyarch Call of Duty game. But also, just in general, are we going to have that unique Treyarch feel still? Or are they going to be porting over a lot of the elements of the game that make Modern Warfare games feel like Modern Warfare games? And of course, I want to mention here, I do realize that the engine doesn't necessarily just dictate the feel of the game. There are a lot of elements that go into that. But if they're basically starting from a base that is the Modern Warfare 2019 or maybe Modern Warfare 2 branch of the engine, is it going to have that unique Treyarch feel? Or is it going to feel more like an Infinity Ward game in that sense? As for the next big question that I have, and I'm sure many in the community have as well, I wonder what's going to happen with matchmaking and disbanding lobbies. Now, I want to state right up front, I don't expect any changes here. What we've been dealing with for the past several years is most likely what we're going to be continuing to see going forward, at least within the foreseeable future. But in saying that, of course, these are such big topics that come up so often and have such a drastic impact on how the game plays and feels that I can't help but have this on my list. And of course, I'm wondering if they are planning on making any adjustments here whatsoever. I still think that having persistent lobbies would be the #1 best thing they could do for the overall feel of the game. Bring back the ability to have rematches and develop friendships and rivalries over time. Bring back that consistency on a game-to-game basis if you decide to stay in a lobby. While I don't expect any changes to this, it's still one of the biggest things that I would love to see, and I hope to see at some point in the future. Will that be this year? Probably not, but it is still one of the biggest questions on my mind. Next, getting outside of the multiplayer experience, since it's a Treyarch COD, I'm very curious to see what they do with zombies. I know there's been several rumors floating around that round-based zombies will be returning with this year's Call of Duty game. And personally, I would love to see that. I know there's a massive community surrounding that, or at least there used to be, but they've been chipping away at that community by often ignoring what that community wants for several years now. So yeah, I am curious to see if they're finally going to be listening to what the zombies community really wants to see, which is round-based zombies and sort of a return to form when it comes to Call of Duty zombies. But then again, at the same time, Modern Warfare Zombies has actually been quite solid, I feel. Aside from the fact that we didn't really get much support for this season, it seems Modern Warfare Zombies is actually quite popular this year. And while I would love to see round-based zombies return, I also kind of don't want to see Modern Warfare Zombies go away. I don't want it to go the way of DMZ, where it basically just loses support after a year. So maybe they can find a way to integrate both, or maybe they're just going to go all in on one or the other. Time will tell on this, but it's definitely a big question, especially going into a Treyarch Call of Duty game. And this leads me to my last question that I've got here, and this one relates to campaign. I'm very curious to see how much they integrate open combat missions, if at all. I know recently there have been some rumors floating around that they will be integrating open combat missions into the campaign. And honestly, I'm not fully opposed to that. I actually quite enjoyed the idea of open combat missions in Modern Warfare 3, but I think the campaign had other issues like being way too short, and also the storyline itself I didn't really love. But the open combat missions themselves, when they're mixed in with regular on-the-rails sort of missions, I think it actually works out quite well. It breaks things up a little bit. It provides a totally unique way to approach the campaign and play the campaign. I loved hunting for those weapon cases and unlocking weapons by doing that. I thought that was really interesting. I personally would like to see some open combat missions return. I just hope they don't rely on that too heavily. And obviously, I hope the story is good on its own, regardless of whether or not there are open combat missions present. And with that, that is going to wrap it up for the top 10 questions I've currently got about COD 2024. Now, I know it's early on at this point. It's probably going to be a couple months still before we get some really solid information or leaks regarding that. But I'm definitely excited for this one, largely because it's a Treyarch COD, and Treyarch is still my current preferred developer for Call of Duty games. And also, this is the first time they've had a really solid, as far as I'm aware, uninterrupted development cycle in many years. So my hopes and expectations are quite high this year. But of course, these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What are some of the big questions you have when it comes to COD 2024 this year? And what are some of your big hopes for COD 2024? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.